Hi there, my name is Amy Pistone and I'm from the University of Michigan. And today I'll be talking about teaching the leaders and best, questioning the great man narrative of classical history. And I should explain briefly that the pre-colon part of the title there is a bit of a play on part of the Michigan Fight Song, which describes Michigan students as the leaders and best. So here this is referencing both teaching the, quote, leaders and best in the classroom and also the content of what we teach them, that being the great man narrative of classical history. So without any further ado, let's get going here. So just to make sure we're on the same page to start, I want to establish what I mean by this great man narrative. What I mean here is the tendency, for obvious reasons, for a presentation of history to focus on the major players. As an illustration, I've added the ancient players you can play in Sid Meier's Civilizations 4 through 6. I think this encapsulates the way that we tend to teach history, as a series of major accomplishments by exceptional men. These are the ID terms that show up on our Greek and Roman history exams. These are the great men. And you can see here we have Cyrus II, Trajan, Justinian I, Ramses II, Julius Caesar, Pericles, Hannibal, Augustus Caesar, and Alexander the Great, in my favorite version, his sort of Playboy Civ 6 version. This is not limited to men per se, though this tends to focus predominantly on men. But we might think of these women here, for instance, as great women, though I think that in some ways, gender is important to any discussion of leadership, and I will return briefly to this topic, though I also hope to discuss this with conference participants, since this is, in many ways, a question with significant contemporary relevance. In the interest of time, let me just say that I understand that there are some obvious reasons that we do this. The first is that we've inherited this model. We've inherited it from historians before us and from ancient historians. We tend to have more information about the great men preserved in the historians that we have than we have about any other characters in the ancient world. Historians and histories focus on the great and marvelous. And here we might think of Herodotus' programmatic statement, that he wrote his history so that things done by people should not fade away over time, and neither should the great and marvelous deeds, those displayed by both the Greeks and the barbarians, have their glory fade. So what's the problem then? What do we lose when we focus on these major figures? We lose the voices of the marginalized. We lose the experiences of women, slaves, and non-citizens. In Athens, we lose the medics and the laborers. In Sparta, we lose the helots, and we lose the authentic experiences of Spartan women, written in their own voices, and instead we settle for whatever voices we can get. And this isn't to say that our field hasn't improved. In fact, there have been loads of significant works trying to get at the non-dominant narratives, looking at the marginalized who are missing when we just look at the major leaders. As just one example, consider the topic of race and ethnicity. Here's a very brief and incomplete sample of works on the topic in the past 20 years, which advances our understanding of those considered racially or ethnically other in the Greek and Roman worlds. So our field and our scholarship is recognizing the problems with this focus on the great men. But when we teach ancient history, we often revert to the great man narrative. After all, can we teach a Greek history course without teaching Leonidas and Pericles, or Alexander the Great? Can we teach a Roman history course without teaching Caesar and Pompey, without the first and second triumvirate? And taking further, can we teach the Iliad without focusing on Agamemnon and Achilles? Can we teach any Augustan age poetry without focusing on the towering figure of Augustus himself? So my suggestion is not that we need to stop teaching these great leaders of the past, but that we are serving our students better if we tweak how we present these leaders. If we contextualize the leaders within their communities and consider the costs of these leaders' greatness. And so prong one of my argument is just that. When leaders exercise traditional leadership, what are the costs of their actions? Can we think about ways to teach history with an eye toward the less powerful? So, just as an example, when we teach Alexander the Great, we might cast our students' eyes toward the cost of his military conquest. History doesn't preserve all the voices which might have been critical of Alexander. We don't have any accounts by the families of everyone Alexander killed to eliminate potential rivals who might challenge his rule. We don't have the voices of the peoples he conquered. We don't have the experiences of the women who would certainly have been subjected to violence, sexual and otherwise, by the conquering soldiers. Here I've just thrown up some of the men whose stories we might focus on. Nearly all of these men are mentioned in Arrian, but do we temper our discussion of Alexander's brilliant military triumphs with stories of the merciless executions, carried out either for strategic purposes or as an example to others who might rebel? Or, as is the case with Clitus the Black, simply because Alexander was at times a drunken and intemperate man. As a further note, and here I'm drawing on an article by Mary Beard in the New York Review of Books, we have many Roman authors who are critical of Alexander, and scholarship has certainly moved in a more critical direction. But I would suggest that popular culture has not. And here I would remind you of the images I showed at the start from Civilization. Many of our students first meet Alexander the Great through pop culture, and if it's through video games, which are extremely numerous as you can see here, then they often encounter Alexander as the greatest military leader of his day, or even of all time. And there's obviously nothing wrong with that. Alexander was a brilliant military strategist and tactician. And so my concern is not to discredit that narrative, but to use this as an example of a place where we can make a small but important intervention. Do we save time at the end of our Greek history surveys to offer these sorts of critiques to our students? Not in the interest of uncritically accepting Roman accounts, but because these sources offer another narrative. When we show our students the voices of dissent, we give credit to those narratives, and we legitimize them. So this then is my first argument. Do we criticize the ancient leaders we teach, and do we offer our students narratives that question the dominant narrative? Do we parrot the propaganda of the powerful people in the ancient world? An easy trap to fall into, to be sure, when most of what survives to us is the narrative that the powerful wanted to tell. As we've all heard, history is written by the victors. But do we work to find and amplify what alternate histories and narratives we can? My second suggestion may be somewhat more controversial, but I think that it is an important one. When we look at ancient sources and ancient history, do we challenge the idea of leadership as we have inherited it? Put another way, how do we even frame the concept of leadership in the ancient world? And so these are the questions I would like to ask in what remains of my talk here. Whose definition of leadership do we use? And what trappings or intellectual baggage comes with this or these definitions? And what about these leadership styles was not in the best interest of all those who were ruled? Now I want to use a case study to explore the actual applications of this approach. We could pick any number of different case studies, but I've chosen to look at the descriptions of Athens in Thucydides. Nothing here is revolutionary in terms of content, but my focus is instead on what we can emphasize when we teach this historical moment. And in the interest of time, I'm introducing this topic in the most cursory manner, though I recognize that there are other opinions out there. And please don't angrily comment on my interpretation here. That said, in sweeping terms, we could approach the Athenians' defeat in the Peloponnesian War as a failure of leadership. I certainly have, when teaching this text. The Corinthians famously describe the national character of Athens at Thucydides 170. And we hear that Athens is composed of innovators. They're swift. They take risks beyond their abilities, and they are daring beyond good judgment. They're unhesitating. They're away from their homes, conquering others. When they conquer their enemies, they take advantage of their momentum, and when they are defeated, they give ground as little as possible. In short, Thucydides tells us, they are born to never allow themselves to be idle or rest, and never to allow others to either. If we examine why Athens lost the Peloponnesian War through the lens of this national character, we can see ways in which the Athenian leadership was, in a sense, a little too Athenian. Rather than deliberating and being content with what they had, Athens overreached and acted in ways that undermined their war efforts. They tried to expand too much in Sicily and they took risks beyond what good judgment would dictate. In short, we can see how a great deal of Athens' eventual loss can be traced back to a specific type of flawed leadership. Leadership that was flawed in this peculiarly Athenian way. But what of it? What does this contribute towards teaching modern leaders and modern leadership? I've long felt that one of the great merits of classics is that it displaces the important humanistic questions into a context that is distant enough for us to engage with, without bringing our personal ideological baggage. We can start in the ancient political context and take what seem to be positive leadership characteristics, but explore the ways that these traits can in fact be a detriment to the civilizations and people who exhibit them. Then, when we turn to a modern context, this perspective can help us critique our own systems in a way that might not otherwise be possible. So as I close then, I would like to offer just one possible application of Thucydides to the modern world. The traits that the Greeks associated with a leader are not so different from the ones that we associate with a leader. These are the sorts of traits that Google suggests are associated with a great leader in the modern world. You can see here energy, courage, experience, the ability to win, the ability to respond to a crisis, toughness, decisiveness, persistence, a singular vision, the ability to influence people, powerfully passionate. However, are these really just neutral traits? Put another way, is there something worth challenging or questioning about these traits? Or is this just evidence that concepts of leadership are one of the great universal constants of all of humanity? Well, I would like to suggest that it's the former. When we think about these traits, these are things that tend to correlate with specifically male leaders. When they occur in a female leader, those female leaders are often described as masculine or embodying a male leader's traits. And I would like to end here with an observation from a recent article by Ezra Klein during the election last year. He writes that one way of reading the Democratic primary is that it pitted an unusually pure male leadership style against an unusually pure female leadership style. Sanders is a great talker and poor relationship builder. Clinton is a great relationship builder and a poor talker. In this case, the first time at the presidential level, the female leadership style won. Can we encourage, or even simply facilitate, our students making this final step then, of thinking about the limitations of leadership as we currently discuss it, and the possibilities that might be available for a new, different style of leadership? Can we show our students the risks and shortcomings inherent in the masculine Athenian style of leadership? A leadership that, when taken to excess, brought down a great empire. And then, can we suggest that there might be similar problems inherent in our own predominantly masculine leadership traits? Can we get our students to challenge and reconceive an entirely different mode of leadership and what that might look like? And that's where I would like to leave this for now. But I eagerly look forward to discussing some of these possibilities that become available if we turn a critical eye toward both ancient and modern modes and models of leadership. Thank you.